Welcome back. The African Union member states are discussing the migration policy framework for Africa and a plan of action for its implementation. The migration policy framework identifies 9 key thematic migration issues and makes policy recommendations for consideration by the AU member states. With more details on that, I'm now joined by migration advisor at the African Union Commission, that is Peter Mudungwe. Good morning and welcome.
Yeah, good morning to you and good morning to the viewers.
Very well. Now, throughout Africa, we have seen history teaches us that there have been a lot of migration in Africa, sometimes voluntary, sometimes involuntary. What is the current status of migration in Africa?
It's still the same. A lot of migration is voluntary and also involuntary. Voluntary in the sense that people make the decision to migrate, mainly for economic reasons or other reasons. But also forced migration is quite high on the continent, especially when we look at IDPs, those are internally displaced people, and refugees. They are forced, due to circumstances. It could be political instability or war or environmental, displacement. So they are forced, to move.
Yeah. Now, the word migration can only be defined to make sense because of the states and the boundaries. But you find communities that are spread across different countries. For example, the Overkwanyama in the northern parts of Namibia, the Overherero, Namibia and Botswana. Is this really caused by political boundaries? Yes.
In fact, it's a common phenomenon on the continent because of the boundaries that were introduced, during, the colonial, period. And some boundaries actually divided, not just, tribes, but, families, like your brother is on one side of the border and the other one is on the other side.
Yeah.
So that, divided, people. And it's very common, but...
and they're still subjected to the migration rules and regulations?
Well, in that case, normally what countries have done is that, people along the border areas are not required to carry, passports in most cases.
So there's special arrangements?
There's a special arrangement, between, nations so that people can move, freely, up and down, on the border.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, this is a policy framework that is, of course, mitigating migration issues in Africa. Has it been adopted by member states and regional bodies in coming up with their own policies at country level?
Yes. Maybe if I can say that, the policy framework was the result of protracted consultations, between the AU Commission, member states, and the regional economic communities. And culminated in the adoption of the policy at the 30th summit of the AU in January this year. So it's an adopted, document of the AU Commission. Yes.
But I'm sure there's still a holdback. What are some of the holdbacks on its implementation?
Well, we are just beginning to implement. As I said, it was adopted in January, and in fact, our being here in Namibia right now is part and parcel of, that, implementation. And this is the first workshop of, 3 planned, workshops. And this workshop, right now in Namibia is for Southern Africa. And we intend to have, 3 more, workshops in the continent. So I wouldn't say right now, what are the holdups, because we've just started implementing. But if I come back here, next year, I think I'll be able to tell you, what the problems have been. Yes.
Okay. Now there was a 2006 migration policy framework for Africa that was dated. It dates back to 2006, and I think yesterday or recently you had a review of this. What are the key findings and the recommendations from the evaluation?
Well, the evaluation had a number of findings, recommendations. But the major finding, was that for the previous, the 2006 policy framework, most member states actually did not know about the policy framework because there was no concerted effort, to popularize it among the member states. Yeah. So the majority of countries actually didn't make use of it in terms of, coming up with their own migration policies.
To harmonize them to that of the African.
Yes, to domesticate. Yeah. So that was, one of the major findings. So hence, and the recommendation was that, we should go out and, popularize, the policy framework among the member states and the RECs, the regional economic communities. So that's why we are here, right now, to popularize, this policy framework. Another finding as well, was that there is need to revise the policy framework. After 10 years, there were a number of developments which had happened. Migration is dynamic. It's moving all the time, and it was felt that there is need to reflect these new changes, these new developments, and then come up with a plan of action as well, because the previous policy framework didn't have a plan of action. So this time around, we decided, that we need a plan of action. So we have a 12-year plan of action, which is annexed to the...
Good. That is a very good move towards evidence-based planning, and resource allocation. We also need that type of action plan. But you are discussing this to ensure that there is implementation of the migration policy framework. How far are the discussions, and when will it be rolled out? Will it be enforced? Will it be monitored? Yes.
In fact, one of the major priorities in our plan of action is to come up with a monitoring and evaluation framework for the policy framework. We are going to put benchmarks that we are going to monitor over the 12-year period, and then halfway through implementation we are going to have an evaluation as well, midterm evaluation, to determine whether it's having an impact and whether it's still relevant, and if there are need for any changes, what do we need to change. So yes, there's going to be monitoring and evaluation of the framework.
Okay, thank you so much. Any departing remarks from you?
Well, I would like to urge member states really to make use of the migration policy framework. It's a very good document which not only looks at the different regions in Africa, but also takes into account the realities of individual member states. So I would urge member states to reference and make use of the migration policy framework in coming up with their own frameworks. And we are prepared to assist member states and regional economic communities in that respect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And send our regards to our very own Ember Kalonda.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
There you have it. That was Migration Advisor at the African Union Commission. That is Mr. Peter Mudungwe, talking to us about the new migration policy framework for Africa. And this time it comes with an action plan and monitoring and evaluation plan to ensure its implementation. GMN will continue, and when we return, we'll talk about India Day. Stay tuned.